The heavy oak doors of the Grand Hotel swung open, letting out a blast of warm, fragrant air that smelled of expensive cigars and roasted vanilla. Inside, the main ballroom was a sea of shimmering lights and crisp white tablecloths. It was one of those nights where the city's richest people gathered to see and be seen. Spending more on a single bottle of wine than most people spent on rent in a month, the room buzzed with the low hum of important conversations. Men in tailored suits checked their watches, and women in sparkling dresses held champagne flutes like delicate jewels. For everyone in this room, the night was about enjoyment, power, showing off. Moving through this glittering crowd was a young woman named Elena. She did not sparkle. Her uniform was a simple black dress with a white apron tied around her waist, and her shoes were sensible black flats that had seen better days. In her hands, she carried a large silver tray loaded with tiny glasses of golden liquid. She walked carefully, her eyes scanning the room not for beauty, but for empty glasses and napkins dropped on the floor. To the people sitting at the round tables, Elena was invisible. She was part of the furniture, just like the velvet curtains or the tall flower arrangements. They looked through her, or sometimes they looked right past her without a second thought. Elena wiped a strand of hair away from her forehead, feeling the sweat that had gathered there. The ballroom was hot, filled with the body heat of 200 people and the heat from the massive kitchen chandeliers. She had been on her feet for 6 hours already, and her feet throbbed with a dull ache that shot up her calves every time she took a step. But she couldn't stop. She needed this job. More than that, she needed the tips. Life outside these heavy doors was expensive and unforgiving. Rent was due. Electricity bills were piling up, and the transmission in her car made a terrible grinding noise every time she stopped at a red light. This job, with its long hours and demanding guests, was the only thing keeping her head above water. She moved toward a table near the front, where 4 men were laughing loudly. One of them was telling a story, waving his arms around, nearly knocking over a water glass. Elena stepped in smoothly, placing fresh drinks on the table and removing the empty ones. Finally, one of the men grunted, not looking at her. He grabbed the glass and took a sip, turning immediately back to his friends. Elena didn't say a word. She just nodded, gave a small, practiced smile, and turned away. She was used to it. In here, she was the help. Out there in the real world, she was something else entirely. But nobody in this room knew that, and she preferred to keep it that way as she made her way back to the kitchen. Her path took her past the far corner of the ballroom. This was the quietest part of the room, tucked away from the main stage and the dance floor. Sitting there, imposing and majestic, was a grand piano. It was a glossy black Steinway, polished to a mirror shine. A small spotlight shone down on it, making the black surface gleam against the dark wood of the floor. Elena slowed down as she walked past it. She couldn't help it. It was like a magnetic pull. The piano was silent right now, covered by a lid that protected the keys, but to Elena, it seemed to hum with potential. It sat there waiting for the guest of honor, a famous pianist who was flown in from New York just for this event. He wasn't due to play for another hour, but the piano stood as a silent guard over the room. She stopped for just a moment, balancing the tray on one hand. She looked at the keyboard, hidden under the fall. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side. It was a reflex, a muscle memory developed over 20 years. Elena closed her eyes for a split second and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding all night. She could almost hear the music in her head. She knew exactly how the keys would feel cool and smooth under her fingertips. The weight of the action as she pressed down. The vibration traveling up through her arms and into her chest when she played. She wasn't a tired waitress with sore feet and empty pockets. She wasn't invisible. When she played, she was whole. The chaos of the world, the bills, the rude customers, the grinding car transmission, it all faded away until there was nothing left but the sound. But that life felt like a dream she had a long time ago. A ghost from her past. Elena opened her eyes and forced herself to keep walking. She had a job to do. Dreaming about the piano wouldn't pay the mechanic. Back in the kitchen, the noise was chaotic and sharp. Chefs shouted orders, dishes clattered, and the industrial fans roared. Elena dropped off her tray and picked up another one. This one loaded with fancy appetizers, little pieces of toast topped with pate and fig jam. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and put her game face back on. She had to be fast, she had to be polite, and she had to be invisible. She walked back out into the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted slightly. The alcohol had been flowing for a while, and the guests were getting louder. A group of women near the bar were laughing with high-pitched shrieks. Alina weaved through them, dodging a waiter carrying a stack of dirty plates. "Excuse me," she said softly, but nobody heard her. She had to squeeze past a man in a gray suit who smelled strongly of cologne. He didn't move an inch, forcing her to turn sideways to brush past him. He didn't even apologize. She felt a flash of irritation, but pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't help. It would just make the night longer. She focused on the food. She focused on the tips. She worked her way around the room, offering the appetizers to the guests. Most took them without looking, their eyes glued to the people they were networking with. A few shook their heads, waving her away like she was a fly. "No, thank you," a woman said, holding up a hand as if Alina were offering her poison. "Don't touch the dress." "Of course, ma'am," Elena said. She moved on to the next table. This one was occupied by an older couple. They weren't laughing or shouting. They were just sitting there, looking bored. The man was checking his phone. The woman was looking at her nails. Alina stepped up to them. "Appetizers." She asked. The man looked up, surprised that she had spoken. He looked at the tray, then at Alina. He seemed to actually see her for the first time, noticing the tiredness in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "It's duck pate with fig," she answered. "Sounds fancy," he mumbled. He took two. "Thanks. You're welcome," Elena said. It was a small interaction, but it made her feel a tiny bit more human. As she turned away from the table, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. The host of the event, a wealthy man who owned half the buildings in the city, walked onto the stage. He tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he boomed. His voice echoed through the room. "I hope you are all enjoying the food and the company. Now, prepare to be amazed. We have a very special treat for you tonight. Direct from the Symphony Hall in New York, please welcome the incredible Julian Thorne." A polite applause rippled through the room. Alina watched from the back as a man with long, flowing hair and a velvet jacket walked toward the corner where the Steinway piano sat. Julian Thorne. She knew the name. He was famous. He was the kind of pianist who played with huge dramatic gestures, tossing his hair around. Making every note sound like a matter of life and death, Alina leaned against the wall near the kitchen doors, watching as Thorne sat down. He adjusted the bench, flared his nostrils, and lifted his hands high above his head. The room went silent. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. Alina felt a small knot of anticipation in her stomach. She loved watching other musicians play. She loved seeing how they interpreted the music, even if they were show-offs. Julian Thorne brought his hands down hard on the keys. The sound that came out was supposed to be dramatic, a powerful opening chord. But instead, it sounded wrong. It was a harsh, clanking noise that made people wince. Thorne frowned. He played a few more notes, running up the scale. The piano sounded tinny, discordant, and uneven. The beautiful instrument was out of tune, and not just a little bit. It sounded painful. Thorne stopped playing. He tapped a few keys again, his face turning red. He looked up at the host on the stage, then out at the crowd. He let out a loud sigh of frustration that the microphone picked up, causing a screech of feedback. "This is unacceptable," Thorne shouted, standing up abruptly. "I cannot perform on this instrument. It is completely out of tune. It sounds like a toy." The room fell into a shocked silence. The host looked confused, then panicked. He rushed toward the piano. "Mr. Thorne, please, surely it's not that bad," the host stammered. "Listen to it." Thorne hit a low key with his fist. It buzzed unpleasantly. "It is garbage. I am an artist. I do not play on garbage." With that, Thorne grabbed his sheet music, turned on his heel, and marched off the stage, heading straight for the exit. The ballroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The guests looked at each other, their mouths open. The music was supposed to be the highlight of the night, and now it was gone. The host stood by the piano, looking helpless. The event coordinator, a frantic woman with a headset, ran onto the stage, whispering wildly into her microphone. Alina watched from the shadows near the kitchen. She saw the panic spreading. She saw the guests starting to grumble. She knew that if something didn't happen soon, this event was going to be a total disaster. And she knew with a sinking feeling in her gut, the staff would probably get blamed for the piano being in bad condition. She looked at the empty bench at the piano. Then she looked down at her own hands. The rough skin from scrubbing dishes, the trimmed nails. Underneath the tiredness, she knew exactly what that piano needed. She knew she could fix the sound not by tuning it, but by playing it differently. By working around the imperfections to make something beautiful. Her heart started to beat faster. It was a crazy idea, a dangerous idea. But as the room filled with tension and the host's face turned purple, Alina took a small step forward. She didn't step out onto the floor yet, but she stepped away from the safety of the wall. She watched the event coordinator looking around wildly, scanning the room for a solution, anyone who could help. The silence stretched on, heavy and awkward. The wealthy crowd was getting restless. It was the kind of silence that begs to be broken. Alina took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. She just had to find the courage to do it. The silence that filled the ballroom was heavy and uncomfortable. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library. It was the awkward, tense silence that happens when something goes wrong at a party and nobody knows what to do. The guests looked around at each other with raised eyebrows. Some people checked their phones, pretending to be busy, while others whispered behind their hands. The famous pianist, Julian Thorne, had vanished through the exit doors, leaving behind a trail of outrage and drama. All that remained was the grand piano, sitting alone in the spotlight, like a child who had been scolded. The host of the event, Mr. Vandercliff, stood on the stage next to the instrument. He looked flustered. His face was flushed a deep shade of red, and he kept tugging at his bow tie, which suddenly seemed too tight. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped beads of sweat from his forehead. This was supposed to be the night of the year for him. He had invited investors, business partners, and rivals to impress them. A musical disaster was the last thing he needed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Mr. Vandercliff stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking slightly. I assure you this is just a small technical difficulty. Please enjoy your desserts. We will have music again momentarily," he signaled frantically to the side of the room. A woman with a headset and a clipboard came running out. This was the event planner, a woman named Jessica, who was usually very calm. Tonight, however, she looked like she was on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Her perfectly styled hair was starting to fall out of place, and she was typing furiously on her phone, likely trying to find a backup musician who could get to the hotel in 10 minutes. Jessica ran up the steps to the stage and whispered urgently to Mr. Vandercliff. The host shook his head violently. "No," he hissed, loud enough for the front row to hear. "I don't care about the cost. Get someone. Anyone. I have a room full of important people who expect a show." Alina stood near the service door watching the scene unfold. She had just dropped off a tray of empty coffee cups in the kitchen. From her spot in the shadows, she could see the panic on the planner's face. She knew the feeling. When things went wrong in the service industry, it was usually the waitstaff, the cooks, and the cleaners who had to fix it, often while being yelled at. The room was getting noisy again. The polite silence was breaking. People were starting to complain. They paid a lot of money for these tickets. They didn't come to listen to a nervous host apologize for a broken piano. They came for entertainment. "This is ridiculous," a man in a gray suit shouted from a table near the front. "Where is the music? Play something yourself," another guest joked, causing a ripple of laughter. Mr. Vandercliff looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He turned to Jessica, his eyes wide with desperation. "Did you find someone? Is the DJ ready? The DJ equipment is for the dance set later, and the technician is on a break." Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "I called the agency, but they can't get a replacement here for at least an hour. Can't wait an hour." Mr. Vandercliff snapped. Do something. Jessica turned away from the host, looking out over the sea of faces. She scanned the waiters, the busboys, the bartenders. She was looking for a miracle. She was looking for anyone who might have a hidden talent. It was a long shot, but sometimes, in these big hotels, you found people who had training in the arts, but were working regular jobs to pay the bills. Alina saw Jessica looking around. She saw the panic in the planner's eyes. Then, almost as if a spotlight hit her, Jessica's gaze landed on the waitstaff station near the kitchen doors. She was looking right at Elena. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She quickly looked down at her shoes, pretending to be busy arranging napkins on a side table. She tried to make herself small. She didn't want to be noticed. But it was too late. Jessica was already marching across the room, moving with purpose, dodging guests and servers. She reached the side station where Elena was standing and grabbed her arm. Jessica said. Her tone was urgent, almost desperate. Elena, right? Elena nodded, feeling her face get hot. Yes, ma'am. Jessica leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and stress. I know this is a strange question, and I know you are working, but is there any chance at all, that you can play that thing? She pointed a manicured finger toward the piano on the stage. Elena blinked. She looked at Jessica, then at the piano, then back at Jessica. I don't think that's a good idea, Elena stammered. Please, Jessica begged, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Vandercliff is about to have a heart attack. The guests are getting angry. If you can play even just a few simple songs to keep the mood light until we figure something out, you would be saving my life. Literally saving my job. Lena looked past Jessica. The room was filled with people who had ignored her all night. People who treated her like she was invisible. People who complained if the water wasn't cold enough. The idea of walking up there, of standing in the light where they could all see her, was terrifying. If she played badly, they would laugh. They would mock her. It would be humiliating. But then she looked at the piano again. It was a beautiful instrument. A Steinway. It deserved to be played. And the truth was, Elena was tired of hiding. She was tired of feeling like her talent didn't matter because she was wearing an apron. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her to be proud of her gift. She thought about the bills waiting for her at home. She thought about the arrogance of the pianist who had stormed out because of a few imperfect strings. I can play, Elena said softly. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Jessica's eyes lit up. Thank goodness, she breathed. Okay, go. Just go up there. Mr. Vandercliff might argue, but I'll handle him. Just don't let them stop talking completely. Just give them background noise, okay? Okay, Elena said. Jessica rushed back toward the stage to smooth things over with the host. Elena stayed where she was for a moment longer. She looked down at her hands. They were slightly dry from the soap in the kitchen. She rubbed them together, trying to warm them up. She could feel the rhythm in her blood, waking up after a long sleep. It felt like coming home after being away for a very long time. She took off her apron and folded it neatly. Placing it on the shelf under the side table, she smoothed down her black dress. It was simple and cheap, not a concert gown, but it would have to do. She took a hair tie from her wrist and pulled her hair back into a tighter, more secure ponytail. She wanted to be able to see the keys. Elena walked out from the safety of the service station. The floor felt different as she moved toward the stage. Usually, she walked with her head down, trying to be invisible. This time, she kept her head up. The walk to the stage felt like the longest walk of her life. The distance between the kitchen doors and the piano seemed to stretch out like a rubber band as she moved through the crowd. The guests didn't notice her at first. They were busy complaining to each other. But as she got closer to the front, a few people stopped talking. They watched her with confusion. They saw the black dress, the sensible shoes. They recognized her as the girl who had been refilling their water glasses all evening. Is she going to play? A woman whispered loudly. Is there a waiter who plays music? A man chuckled. Elena ignored them. She kept her eyes fixed on the piano. It was the only thing that mattered. When she reached the steps leading up to the stage, Mr. Vandercliff was there. He looked at Alina with total confusion. He turned to Jessica, his face turning dark. "What is this?" Mr. Vandercliff demanded. "I asked for a professional musician, not a waitress." "What?" "She is the only option right now, sir," Jessica said firmly, standing her ground. "She says she can play. Just let her try. If it's bad, the guests will leave anyway. But if it works, we might save the night." Mr. Vandercliff looked at Alina. He looked at the guests who were starting to get rowdy. He was out of options. He looked defeated. He let out a heavy sigh and stepped back. "Fine," he grumbled. "Make it quick. And don't touch the champagne." He walked off the stage, leaving Alina alone in the center of the platform. The spotlight hit her. It was bright, much brighter than it looked from the floor. It made it hard to see the audience, which was actually a relief. She couldn't see their judgmental faces, only the dark outline of the room. Alina walked over to the bench. It was polished wood, gleaming under the lights. She sat down. The bench was firm. She adjusted it, sliding it forward a few inches. She reached up and opened the keyboard cover. It fell back into place with a soft thud. The keys looked at her, white and black rows of possibilities. She placed her hands on her knees for a moment, taking a deep breath to center herself. The room was silent. The whispers had stopped. 200 wealthy people were waiting to see what the girl with the tray was going to do. She could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, almost suffocating. They expected her to fail. They expected chopsticks or a clumsy mistake. They expected a joke. Alina lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. She didn't start with a simple tune. She didn't start with a safe background song. She closed her eyes for a split second, imagined the sound she wanted, and let her fingers drop. The first chord that rang out was deep and resonant, filling the entire hall. It cut through the silence like a knife. It wasn't just a sound. It was a statement. The vibration hummed in the floorboards, rattling the silverware on the tables. Alina didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't hesitate. She launched into a complex, rolling melody. Her left hand established a steady, driving rhythm, while her right hand danced across the higher keys, playing fast, intricate runs that shimmered like light on water. It wasn't a soft background piece. It was powerful, confident, and loud. She played a few bars, her fingers moving with a speed that surprised even her. It had been a while since she had played an instrument this good, but her hands remembered. They knew exactly where to go. She felt the music taking over, moving from her brain down through her arms and into the keys. The feeling was intoxicating. Out in the darkness of the room, the murmurs died away completely. The man who had been laughing a moment ago stopped with his drink halfway to his mouth. The woman fixing her nail polish froze. They were listening. Actually listening. The music wasn't just noise. It was alive. It had emotion, anger, sadness, and joy all mixed together. It was the sound of someone who had something to say. Asterisk, the sound that came from the piano was not soft or polite. It was a thunderous, rolling wave of notes that seemed to shake the dust from the chandeliers. Alina's fingers were moving fast, much faster than the eye could follow. She wasn't playing a simple background song anymore. She had chosen a piece that was intense and difficult, something that demanded attention. For the first few seconds, the room was frozen. The guests near the front actually flinched at the volume. They were expecting a shy, perhaps clumsy attempt at a nursery rhyme, or a slow, boring waltz. They were ready to pity her or to laugh. But what they heard was confidence. It was raw power. The melody was sharp and urgent, jumping from the low. Heavy notes of the left hand to the high, piercing notes of the right. Alina felt the sweat on her back. But it wasn't the nervous sweat of carrying heavy trays. This was the heat of concentration. She sat up straighter, her posture changing. On the floor, she slumped to hide, but here, on the bench, she was tall. Her eyes were closed, shutting out the harsh spotlight and the faces of the crowd. She didn't need to see them. She could feel the music in her chest. The piano, which the famous pianist had called garbage, was suddenly singing. The strings vibrated in harmony, the wood resonating with a rich, warm tone. It was true that it wasn't perfectly tuned. Some notes were slightly sharp or flat, but Alina heard it. She knew exactly which keys to press softly and which to strike hard to make it sound right. She was compensating for the flaws, wrestling with the machine to create beauty. It was like a conversation between her and the instrument. And for the first time that night, the piano was being listened to. Out in the darkness, the atmosphere began to shift. The man in the gray suit, the one who had shouted rudely earlier, slowly lowered his glass. He had been about to make another joke, but the music stopped him. He looked at the stage, really looking for the first time. He saw the young woman in the plain black dress, her back to him, her hands moving like lightning over the keys. Rachmaninoff. A woman whispered to her husband, sounding puzzled. It sounds like the second piano concerto, but different. Right. The husband didn't answer. He was too busy listening. The music was complex. It had layers. It made you feel something. It wasn't just noise to fill the air. It was a story. The wealthy guests were used to hearing performers who were technically perfect, but sometimes played without soul. They heard music that was rehearsed and polished until it was smooth and boring. This was different. This was messy and real. It sounded like someone fighting for something. Elena's mind was clear. As she played the difficult runs, her fingers flying up and down the scales, she forgot about the bills. She forgot about the rude customers and the heavy trays. She forgot about her worn-out shoes. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a musician. She was the most important person in the room. The power dynamic had flipped. They needed her now. She was the one controlling the mood, the silence, and the sound. She hit a particularly difficult section of the song. It's a series of massive chords that required strength and speed. She leaned into it, putting her whole body weight into the keys. The sound crashed through the room like a wave. The sheer volume of it made the candle flames on the tables flicker. Mr. Vandercliff, the host, stood near the edge of the stage. His mouth was slightly open. He looked at the stage where his star performer had stormed off just minutes ago, and then at the waitress who was playing better than anyone had played in his hall in years. He looked at Jessica, the event planner, who was standing with her arms crossed, a small, triumphant smile on her face. Where did she come from? Vandercliff whispered, more to himself than to Jessica. How's this happening? She told you she could play, Jessica whispered back. You just have to listen sometimes. The music shifted tempo. It moved from the loud, crashing intro into a softer, more flowing melody. The room became incredibly quiet. It was the kind of silence where people are afraid to breathe because they might miss a note. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clinking of a glass from the bar. But otherwise, the room was captive. Alina played the soft melody with incredible tenderness. Her hands were gentle now, caressing the keys rather than striking them. This part of the music was sad, full of longing. It was the feeling of being tired but not giving up. It was the feeling of working hard for something you can't quite reach. The guests sat still, many of them putting down their phones. The social media updates, the business emails, the gossip, it all stopped. For a moment, the gap between the wealthy elite and the working staff seemed to disappear. The music was a universal language that everyone in the room understood. Regardless of how much money they had in the bank, a young couple sitting near the front, who had been arguing quietly about finances, stopped fighting. The man reached across the table and took his wife's hand. They listened together. The music reached them. It reminded them of something they had forgotten, perhaps why they fell in love in the first place. Even the servers, who were standing in the back corners with trays, stopped moving. They knew Alina. They worked with her every day. They had no idea she could do this. They watched with wide eyes, their own fatigue forgotten for a moment. They felt a surge of pride. One of them, a bartender named Tom, whispered, "Go on, Elena."
Elena.
Didn't hear him, but she felt the energy of the room changing. The tension that had been in the Arangor boredom, arrogance was being replaced by awe. She was winning them over. She wasn't just filling in. She was conquering. As the piece neared its climax, Elena's intensity grew. The music became faster and more complicated. Her fingers were a blur. She was playing complicated rhythms with the left hand, while the right hand spun out beautiful melodies. It was technically demanding, requiring total focus. A single mistake could ruin the flow, but she didn't make any. She wasn't reading music. There was no sheet music on the stand. She was playing from memory, recalling a piece she had practiced 1,000 times in a small, dusty apartment years ago. She played the notes exactly as she remembered hearing them on her old records. She poured her own life into the interpretation. She played her frustration, her tiredness, her hope, and her strength. The piano roared with the sound of it. The guests were now fully engaged. People were turning their chairs completely toward the stage. The whispers had stopped. The only movement in the room was the gentle swaying of a few heads to the rhythm of the music. The cynical looks were gone, replaced by genuine appreciation. They were realizing that talent isn't about a fancy tuxedo or a famous name. Talent is about what comes out of the instrument. Mr. Vandercliff's cheeks were no longer red with embarrassment. They were pink with excitement. He realized he was witnessing something special. He pulled out his phone, not to check emails, but to record a video. He knew nobody would believe him if he just told them the story. On the bench, Alina felt a strange sensation. She knew she was being watched, but she didn't feel judged. She felt heard. The piano was responding to her, the notes ringing out true and clear. She was in the zone, that magical place musicians talk about where time seems to slow down and the hands just know what to do. She felt a sense of power she hadn't felt in years. The music was building up to the final section. The tension was rising. The notes were getting higher, faster, louder. The audience was leaning forward, unconsciously waiting for the release. It felt like the room was holding its breath collectively. Alina took a deep breath, preparing for the most difficult part of the piece. She was going to have to jump her left hand far down the keyboard while her right hand played trills at the top, bringing them together in a massive, resolving chord. It was a moment of pure drama. She visualized the keys. She felt the rhythm in her feet. She didn't think about the rent. She didn't think about the broken car. She thought about the music. She thought about how much she loved this sound, how much she missed it. She threw her soul into the instrument, pouring every ounce of her being into the final run. And then she let go. She played the final sequence, her hands crashing down the keyboard in a cascade of sound, building to a roar and then silence. She didn't fade out. She didn't mess up. She hit the final chord with total authority, holding it down, letting the vibration hang in the air, filling the entire ballroom with the sound. It was a perfect, resonant C major chord that seemed to vibrate. In the chests of everyone listening, she lifted her hands off the keys. The silence that followed was heavier than before. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was a reverent one. The chord seemed to echo in the high ceilings, refusing to die away. Alina sat there, her chest heaving slightly, her hands resting on her thighs. She didn't stand up immediately. She just listened to the sound fading into the darkness. Giving the music the respect it deserved, for 3 seconds, nobody moved. The room was completely still. Then the sound seemed to break the spell. A man near the back let out a breath he had been holding. Someone else whispered, "Wow." Lena opened her eyes. The spotlight was still blinding, but she could sense the change. The air in the room was different. The coldness was gone. She wasn't invisible anymore. Asterisk, the silence in the room stretched on for a heartbeat. But it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence from before. It was electric. The last echo of the piano note seemed to hang in the air like mist, refusing to fade away. Alina sat on the bench, her hands resting on her knees, breathing hard. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears. For a moment, she felt afraid. She wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe they were angry that she had interrupted their dinner so loudly. Maybe they were just confused. Then, a sound came from the back of the room. It was the sharp, distinct sound of hands clapping. It was just one person at first, clapping with a steady rhythm. Then, another person joined in. Suddenly, like a dam breaking, the entire room erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. 200 people jumped to their feet almost at the exact same time. The sound was deafening, bouncing off the high ceilings and the marble floors. It was the kind of noise that makes your chest vibrate. Alina sat there frozen for a second, her eyes wide. She looked out toward the darkness. But all she could see was a blur of movement. Mr. Vandercliff, the host, was leading the applause. He wasn't just clapping. He was beaming. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. The embarrassment of the earlier disaster was gone, completely washed away by the music. He was shouting bravo. Over and over again. The event planner, Jessica, was standing near the stage with her hand over her mouth, tears actually shining in her eyes. She looked at the other staff members and gave them a thumbs dash up. Alina slowly stood up. She felt shaky, like her legs might not hold her. She was just a waitress used to walking on flat floors, not a performer used to bowing to a crowd. She walked to the front of the stage, the spotlight still blinding her. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she could feel the energy coming from them. It was warm. It was appreciative. It was respect. She gave a small, awkward curtsy. It wasn't a professional stage bow. It was a simple gesture of thanks. As she straightened up, the applause got even louder. A few people shouted encore, and more. A woman near the front, the one who had been complaining about her dress earlier, smiling and clapping enthusiastically, looking genuinely delighted. For a minute, Alina didn't move. She let the sound wash over her. She realized that these people, the ones who usually looked right through her, were now looking only at her. They weren't seeing the uniform or the tray. They were seeing the artist. It was a strange and overwhelming feeling. All the years of hard work, the invisible struggles, the late nights practicing on a cheap keyboard in a tiny apartment tit, all felt like it was worth it in this moment. She looked at Mr. Vandercliff. He was waving his hand, motioning for her to play another song. The audience quieted down slightly, waiting, hoping. Alina looked at the piano keys again. Her hands felt stiff, but also excited. The adrenaline rushing through her veins made her feel powerful. She realized she wasn't tired anymore. She felt more awake than she had in years. Alina sat back down on the bench. She adjusted the microphone slightly. She didn't say anything into it. She didn't have a speech prepared. She didn't want to explain who she was or why she was there. She just wanted to play. She placed her hands on the keys. This time, she chose something different. The first piece had been intense and dramatic, meant to grab their attention. For this second song, she wanted to show them something else. She started to play a soft, jazz-influenced melody. It was smooth and cool, like water flowing over rocks. The reaction in the room was instant. The guests who had been standing sat back down. The tension was completely gone now. The atmosphere turned from a concert into a party. People started ordering more drinks. They were smiling, talking to each other, but they were still listening. The music had become the heartbeat of the room again, but this time it was a happy, relaxed heartbeat. Alina played with a looseness she hadn't felt in a long time. She improvised a little, adding runs and trills that weren't in the sheet music. She was having fun. She would look up into the darkness and imagine the expressions on their faces. She saw the man in the gray suit tapping his foot on the floor. She saw a young couple swaying in their seats. The music was connecting them. She played for another 20 minutes. She didn't look at the clock. She didn't worry about the tray stacking up in the kitchen. She just flowed from one song to another. She played a classical piece that was light and airy, then switched to a popular song that everyone recognized, playing it with a complex, elegant twist that made it sound brand new. Back in the kitchen, the staff was gathered around the small monitor that showed the camera feed of the ballroom. They were watching in amazement. The head chef, a man who rarely smiled, was nodding his head in approval. "Look at her go," the dishwasher whispered. "I had no idea." "It's Alina," the bartender said, pouring a glass of wine. "She's always quiet during shift, but she's got a fire in her belly." The kitchen staff felt a sense of pride that night. Usually, they were the ones hidden in the back, doing the hard work while the guests got the glory. Tonight, one of their own was the star. It made them feel like they could be anything. As Alina played the final notes of her set, a slow, melancholy tune that brought the mood back down to something peaceful, she felt a sense of completion. She lifted her hands from the keys and stood up. This time, she took a proper bow. She smiled a genuine, radiant smile that the spotlight caught. The applause was loud again, but it was different this time. It was the applause of people who had been moved, not just entertained. Alina turned and walked off the stage. As soon as she stepped into the darkness off to the side, her knees felt weak. She leaned against the wall for a moment to steady herself. Jessica, the event planner, rushed over to her. She was holding a bottle of water. "You were amazing," Jessica said, grabbing Elena's hands. "Absolutely amazing. Mr. Vandercliff is beside himself. He wants to talk to you." "He does?" Alina asked, her voice raspy. She took the water and drank it in one long gulp. "Yes, everyone is asking who you are," Jessica said. "You have to come back into the room." Alina hesitated. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and reality was creeping back in. She was still a waitress. She still had to clean up tables. "I have work to do," she said softly. "The guests need their coffee." Jessica looked at her sternly. "The coffee can wait. Come with me." Jessica took Elena's arm and led her back toward the ballroom floor. Alina felt exposed. She was walking without her tray, without her apron, just in her black dress. She felt like she was walking into a lion's den, but the lions were now friendly. Mr. Vandercliff was waiting for her. As soon as she appeared, he hurried over, his hand extended. "My dear," he said, his voice booming with enthusiasm. "That was unexpected and absolutely brilliant. You saved the night." "You really did." Alina shook his hand. It felt strange shaking the hand of the man who signed her paychecks, especially when he was looking at her with such respect. "Thank you, Mr. Vandercliff. I am sorry if I interrupted the schedule." "Interrupted? You made the schedule." He laughed. "I haven't heard playing like that in years. Where did you learn to play like that?" "I took lessons when I was younger," Alina said simply. "I used to play a lot." "Well, you must play more often," he insisted. "I insist that you play at our next event. As a guest, not as staff. We will pay you, of course. A proper fee." A few guests had gathered around to listen. They were nodding in agreement. "Yes, please play for us again," the woman in the diamond necklace said. It was the highlight of our month. "I know someone at the conservatory," a man in a tuxedo said, pulling a card from his pocket. "If you are interested in more opportunities, you must call me." Alina stood there, surrounded by these wealthy, powerful people, holding a business card in one hand and a water bottle in the other. It felt surreal. Just an hour ago, they were ignoring her. Now, they were offering her jobs. It wasn't the money that shocked her the most, though the money would be nice. It was the validation. They heard her. They really heard her. She looked at them, their expectant faces waiting for her to say something professional. But she didn't have a business card. She didn't have an agent. She just had the feeling of the keys under her fingers. I will think about it," Alina said politely. "Thank you for listening." She backed away gently. She didn't want to get pulled into a long conversation about contracts and dates. She needed a moment to breathe. She needed to process what had just happened. She walked toward the back of the room, near the service doors. The guests she passed smiled at her. Some of them patted her on the shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. They were acknowledging her humanity. As she reached the service doors, she paused and looked back at the room. The piano was sitting on the stage, silent again. But it didn't look lonely anymore. It looked proud. The guests were talking loudly, laughing, enjoying the rest of their evening. The disaster had been averted. But more than that, the evening had been transformed. It wasn't just a dinner party now. It was a memory, and Alina was the one who created it. She pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The noise of the dishes and the chefs hit her like a wall. It was her real world. Her feet were starting to throb again, reminding her that she wasn't a princess in a fairy tale. She was a worker. But tonight, she was a worker who had magic in her hands. The bartender saw her come in and raised a glass. "The piano lady," he shouted. The kitchen staff cheered and clapped. It was a rougher, louder sound than the polite applause in the ballroom, but to Alina, it sounded much sweeter. She smiled, a tired but happy smile, and went to put her apron back on. The night wasn't over yet. but she knew that whatever happened next, she would be okay. She had played her heart out, and the world had listened. Asterisk, the applause from the ballroom was just a faint hum behind. The heavy steel doors of the kitchen. The air in here was different. It smelled of grease, bleach, and steam. It was hot, loud, and chaotic. The clatter of metal pots and the shouting of orders was the soundtrack of Elena's real life. For a moment, standing there in her black dress, she felt dizzy. It was like she had stepped out of a dream and crashed. Back onto hard pavement, she walked over to the corner where she had left her apron. Her hands were trembling slightly as she picked it up. The white fabric was stained with a spot of coffee she had wiped up earlier. She tied the strings around her waist, pulling them tight. It felt like a heavy weight settling back on her shoulders. She was no longer the star of the show. She was Elena the server again. "The piano lady is back in the building," the head chef shouted from the grill line. He turned around, a massive spoon in his hand, and pointed it at her. "You really did it, kid. You made them shut up in there. That's a miracle." A few of the dishwashers stopped scrubbing pans to clap. Tom, the bartender, came out from the bar area with a glass of orange juice. "Drink this," he said, pushing it into her hand. "You look like you need sugar. And honestly, you were incredible. I've never seen Vandercliff look so happy." Lena took the glass and drank. The cold liquid was sweet and refreshing. She looked around the kitchen at her coworkers. These were the people who knew her. They knew she was tired. They knew she complained about her car, and they knew she was broke. But they were looking at her with a new kind of respect. It wasn't the awe of the wealthy guests. It was the pride of a team. It felt genuine. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," Elena said, setting the glass down. "You didn't cause a scene?" Tom laughed. "You saved the party. I heard Jessica talking. The tips are going to be huge tonight because everyone is in such a good mood. You basically just paid for our car repairs." Elena smiled weakly. She liked that idea. She liked that her music helped her friends. But as the adrenaline started to fade, the reality of her situation crept back in. She had bills due tomorrow. Her car transmission was still making that grinding noise. Playing one song didn't fix the rent. It was a beautiful moment, but the sun would come up tomorrow, and she would still be struggling. Jessica, the event planner, pushed through the swinging doors. She looked frantic, but she was smiling. "There you are," she said, rushing over to Elena. "Mr. Vandercliff is looking for you. He wants to talk to you before you leave." Elena shook her head. "Jessica, I really need to finish my shift. I have tables to clear." "Forget the tables," Jessica said firmly. "I have the bus staff handling that, Mr. Vandercliff insists. He's in the private office." "Please, Elena, just go talk to him." Elena looked at the kitchen crew. They all nodded at her, shooing her away. "Go," the chef said. "We got this. Don't keep the boss waiting." Elena untied her apron again and hung it up. She smoothed her hair down and took a deep breath. She walked out of the kitchen and down the long, carpeted hallway toward the administrative offices. The walls were decorated with photos of past events, galas, weddings, and corporate parties. She had walked down this hall 100 times to pick up her paycheck. But she had never been invited into the private office. She knocked on the mahogany door. "Come in," a voice called out. Mr. Vandercliff was sitting behind a large desk. He had taken off his bow tie and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. On his desk sat a crystal glass of amber liquid and a stack of papers. "Elena," he said, standing up to greet her. "Please, sit down." Elena sat in the leather chair opposite him. It was soft and comfortable. She felt small in the big room, but Mr. Vandercliff didn't make her feel like a servant this time. "Wanted to thank you personally," he said, leaning forward on his desk. "What you did tonight?" "Well, it was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time." "And the talent? Unbelievable. That pianist from New York with all his attitude, he couldn't hold a candle to you." "Thank you, sir," Elena said softly. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than help," he said. "You saved my reputation. Those guests are influential people. They were bored, and a bored guest is a dangerous guest. But you captivated them. They're still talking about it." He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the desk toward Alina. "This is your pay for the night," he said, "plus a bonus from me. And the guests were asking the staff to pass on their tips to you?" I collected it all. Alina picked up the envelope. It was thick, much thicker than her usual paycheck. She peeked inside and saw a stack of cash. It was more money than she had seen in one place in a long time. Her eyes widened. This is too much," she stammered. "I can't take all of this." "You earned it," Vandercliff said firmly. "Every penny." He leaned back and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, I have been hosting these events for 20 years. I see a lot of people. Some have money, some have style, and some have talent. Rarely do I see someone who can walk into a room invisible and leave as a star." Alina looked down at her hands. "It was just one song, sir. I have to go back to work on Monday." "Do you?" Vandercliff asked. "I mean, do you want to go back to just serving tables?" Alina paused. The question hung in the air. Did she want to go back? She liked her coworkers, but she hated the feeling of being invisible. She hated the exhaustion that never went away. Music was the only thing that made her feel alive, but she had given up on it because life was too hard. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Music doesn't always pay the bills. I have responsibilities." "True," Vandercliff nodded. "But you have a gift, Alina. Wasting it serving drinks would be a tragedy for the rest of us." He picked up a business card and wrote a number on the back. "I have a friend who runs a foundation for young musicians, and another friend who books acts for the symphony downtown. I told them about you tonight. They are interested." He handed her the card. "I'm not saying you will be famous overnight, but you shouldn't be playing in the dark forever. Think about it. You have an open invitation to play here any time, but as a performer. Not as a waitress." Lena took the card. She held it carefully, like it was made of gold. It wasn't a record deal, and it wasn't a magic fix, but it was a door. A door that had been locked for a long time was now slightly ajar. "Thank you, Mr. Vandercliff," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Really, thank you for listening." "Thank you for playing," he replied. "Now, go home and get some rest. You've earned it." Alina stood up and walked to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back. The room was quiet, the lamps casting a warm glow. It felt like the end of a chapter. She walked out of the office and back through the kitchen to grab her coat. The staff waved goodbye as she left. She walked out the back door of the hotel into the cool night air. The city was quiet at this hour. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. A few taxis drove by, their tires humming on the pavement. Alina took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain and exhaust fumes, but to her, it smelled like possibility. She walked to the parking lot where her old car was parked. It was a beat-up sedan with a dent in the side door. As she unlocked it and slid into the driver's seat, she heard the familiar grinding noise of the engine. It was still broken. The check engine light flickered on, glowing orange in the darkness. Nothing had magically fixed itself. The rent was still due. The struggle of real life was waiting for her in the morning. But as she sat there, her hands resting on the steering wheel, she realized something was different. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had carried heavy trays all night. She flexed her fingers. They tingled slightly. Remembering the feeling of the ivory keys, she was still Alina. She was still tired. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She knew what she was capable of now. She had looked into the eyes of the wealthiest people in the city and made them feel something. She had turned a disaster into a triumph. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the thick envelope of tips and the business card with the number on the back. She smiled. It was a small, quiet smile. Alina started the car. The engine groaned, but it turned over. She put the car in drive and headed out onto the open road. The street lights flashed by, one after another like notes on a page. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She might have to work a double shift again. She might have to fix the transmission. But for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't look scary. It looked like a song she was just beginning to learn, and she was ready to play it.